the right leaders. They have a very strong chief executive who's got a strong vision and an aspiration for the organization. And the organization does several things. They do policy, so they work with government on policy development. They do research. They do a lot around economics and data analysis. And they do that on an international level for health and healthcare. So I met them, and they said, we want to do OD. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, we want to be better at what we do. We're already good. They knew that. They are a good organization, but they want to do more. And I said, okay, fine. Let's just think about what that might mean in practice. So I introduced them to the model from McKinsey. And I said, these are some of the areas you might want to consider. And they said, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do some of that. I said, okay, fine. So the first thing we did was we did an OD diagnostic. We said, let's just look at where you are now. Let's get under the skin of your organization. You say you're good, and I believe you. Why wouldn't I? Okay, I don't know any different. We're going to find out how good you really are. And we're going to do that by we're going to ask your people, all of your people. So we engaged in a number of focus groups. We brought people together from across the organization at different levels, and we said two things. The first one is, whatever you say in this room, whatever you share, is completely confidential to the people here and to us. Okay? And the second thing we said is, we will gather whatever you share with us, and we are going to take that back to your top team. We are going to feed that back. But what we promise we won't do is we won't attribute anything to an individual. So we won't point fingers and say, such a body said this. We wanted to make it as safe as possible for people to really be honest about what was going on in the organization. Okay? And what we found was just really quite interesting. And we did a lot of the work in the focus groups, the conversations we had. We used several headings. Okay? And the headings we had were around, is there a clear purpose in this organization? Do people really understand what they're here to do? And do they know how they're expected to behave on a day-to-day basis? Okay? This organization has a set of values. And we reminded people of that. Well, we asked them the question and said, can you tell us what your values are? And of the people in the room, approximately each group was about 20 to 25. They were like, yeah, there's something about joined up working. There's something about communication. And I said, so between you, you don't actually know the value. You know, you should be able to say what your values are quite quickly. You should know what they are. They should be sort of front of mind almost every day as you begin your day. So we asked those questions. We also asked them about their leaders and their managers, and we said, how is it working with these people? What's the relationship? And how do you know? So when you say, yeah, my manager's really great, what does that mean? When you say they're great, describe what great looks like. Okay? Then we asked them about their teams and said, what's the value of being in this team? Do you believe that everybody in this, your team, your personal team, is doing what they need to do to contribute to what your team is expected to deliver? We asked them about the environment and said, is working here a good place to work? So what's the culture? You know, is it open? Is it transparent? Do you believe that what you bring every day allows you to give your best? And then we asked them to talk about the processes. So do you have the right tech? Do you have the right systems? Where there are issues with your systems, can you improve it? Can you provide solutions? Can you talk to your manager in an open way to say, I actually think we could do this better, we could do it differently? And it was really interesting. And it was interesting because where you see the red dots, that's where they ended up on the scale, on a scale of 1 to 10. So I guess you can see it's pretty evident. They weren't quite as good as they thought they were at the time. And what we agreed, when we took this information back to their top teams, the chief exec and the directors, and the 7 of them all together, when we took it back to them, they were firstly quite surprised, as I'm sure you'd find that. You know, they were quite surprised. They were also, in truth, quite disappointed, because it's not what they expected to see at all. Once they got over the disappointment, and then we had to have quite a lot of conversations about how disappointed they were, and their questions were like, so who said that then? which part of the organization is that? And I said, it's not about which part of the organization. This is the organization. This is your organization. So you need to take all of it. It's not just, is it Ben's part of the organization or is it Paul's part of the organization? It's your organization collectively. You are the top team of this organization. And then what we agreed that we'd do is actually we would take a year. So as I came away in December, we have run some of the focus groups again to see where we are now, almost a year on. And we will, inshallah, do the same again coming up to December this year. Because what we want to see is a movement in this scale. And inshallah, we want to see movement towards the right-hand side. We've not suggested to them that by the time we do the work and complete the work, everything will be a 10. But what we are suggesting, I'm sorry, I keep throwing my arms around. Thank you. Thank you. So what we are suggesting is that there will be positive movement in the right direction. That's what we are suggesting they will do. Over here, what you will see is in those focus groups, we also ask people about the aspiration for the organization. So if you're engaging in the right way, what will this organization look like when it's doing things really well? And what they're suggesting is that they want to be an organization that is able to learn, that is collaborative and agile in developing their people and how they deliver their work together. That's their aspiration. And they wanted something that was really simple. And it has to be simple for people to be able to engage with it every day. You know, what we can't have, as I said, they said, oh, you know, we could have a 10-point plan. And I was like, you could have a 10-point plan. But if people can't remember the values and there's only 4, how are they going to remember a 10-point plan every day? I don't think that's going to do it. So we need something like do you know, like an elevator pitch? Yeah, a USP. You know, you should be able to describe what you do between one level and the next. So we came up with this one sentence that hopefully everyone will remember. And what we also said is that when we drill down under that, what does that actually look like? How do we begin to, the strategic narrative? So what are we asking our leaders to really begin to deep dive into? And this is what they came up with. And I'm not going to read all of this, but what they're suggesting is that this organization will value its people, its knowledge, its learning, and it will continuously improve on what it's doing. Okay? And then you can see the rest of it for yourself. They want to be resilient, they want to be flexible, they want to be agile. And we captured all of that under 3 words. And this was to, because we're going to do some work on the values, we said for now we will just have 3 words that hopefully everybody can remember about this organization. Those 3 words are, we're going to be a learning organization. So every opportunity is an opportunity to learn and do things better. Okay, it's as simple as that. We want to be an organization that is about collaboration. We want our people to feel free to be able to work together, because no one person is able to do everything. No one person has all the answers. So we want our people to work together, and we want to make it okay that they share information, they share knowledge, they share their learning, so that everybody's standard is uplifted together. And what we want is organizational agility. So we're no longer in a place where an organization say, this is how we do, and this is how we're going to do it for the next 5 years. We need our organizations to be flexible and adaptable. We need our people to be able to flex and adapt and change. And underneath that, we need our managers to be able to, our leaders to be able to engage people in a way that allows them to do that, gives them permission to be flexible and adaptable and come up with solutions. And that work we captured, I want to really share with you. So when we talk about OD, what does OD mean when you begin to drill down into the deeper levels? So with this organization, we split the work into, we said we would split the work into 3 broad headings, okay? Those headings are a culture of leadership excellence. We want to start at the top, okay? When we began the conversations with the leaders, what we were given was an impression that everybody in the leadership team, those people I described, know what they need to do individually and collectively. As we met with them separately and together, it became quite apparent that, yes, they do know what's expected of them, but they don't always behave as a cohesive team. So we want to create a culture where people in the organization know that the top team is the top team and they are one team. One team that's all pulling in the same direction. So cultural leadership excellence, what does that mean in reality? And this is the work we are aspiring to do. So we've done some of this already over the last year. We will continue to do this over the coming period. So we've agreed that we are going to actually explicitly agree, the role and expectations of the leadership team. So what do they commit to doing, and how do they commit to behaving as a team? Okay, it sounds really simple, but it was interesting that, when we were talking to the staff, some of them would say, yeah, I know that when the leadership team, and they meet every fortnight, every 2 weeks on a Tuesday morning, the leadership team come together for 3 hours. And some of that time is about the strategic piece, and some of it's about operational work. And we know from our conversations with staff that when that team leave that room, some of them will say different things to what they said in the team meeting. We found that really quite interesting, but quite concerning also. So we said what we really need right up front is to agree what that top team is all about. And that's the piece about integrity, is what you say you're going to do, actually what you do. Is there congruence between those two things? Because there is no point saying one thing and doing something different, not only for yourself, but it's also not good for the rest of the organization. That made us go into a piece around visible role modeling. We want our people, when they report back, when we do that survey again, we want our people to be able to say, yeah, what they say they're going to do is what they actually do. So we want our people, our leaders, to model that behavior, not just the top team, but at each level as we go through. We've also started a process of development. So we are taking 2 days with the top team every 3 months. Every 3 months, they come together for 2 whole days. So they travel on the Wednesday, they have Thursday night dinner, and then Friday. And in that period, we're working with them quite intensely around leadership development, very specifically around personal effectiveness, them with their team, and them across the organization. So it's me, we, us. That's the piece that we're asking them to engage around. And that's the power of it. And then what we're saying is that we will run those surveys again, and we will ask leaders to lead the work, the changes that are needed as we go forward. The second of the 3 headline areas is culture of performance excellence. Okay? And this, we think, is really the sort of the link piece between what you're aspiring to do in the top team and the rest of the organization. In terms of a culture of leadership, performance excellence, we're asking them to define, what does high performance mean here? We know what it can mean generally, but what does it mean for you here in this organization? Can you describe that? We're asking them to redefine their values, and we're going to do quite a lot of work with the staff population to agree the values. So hopefully when we say to people, so what are your values? They'll be able to say, 1, 2, 3. These are them. And I know that because I was involved in a conversation to agree those values. I helped give them shape. And because I played my part, I know I can own them. I have as much to lose if we don't do this in this way. We're going to do some work around the behaviors framework. And by behaviors framework, what we're really talking about is the competence. So what are the behaviors we want people to demonstrate that underpin the values? And then beyond that, we have some really, in terms of the enabling environment, what we really want is for people to work in very specific ways. And those are, for this organization, it's about knowledge management. So how do we manage our knowledge? This organization, as I said, is about policy, it's about data, it's about, they're economists. So how do we capture our knowledge? How do we ensure that the value of that knowledge is in this organization? We're setting up a virtual program management office. So we're asking people to work in a very disciplined way using agile methodology, and we're introducing that into the organization. And what we're asking them to do is we're going to provide the tools for collaboration, and we expect them to use them. And then the third and final headline area is our talent and workforce development. So this is all great. You know, we've got a culture of leadership excellence, we've got a culture of performance excellence. What are we doing with our people? And what we're suggesting are several things. We have already refreshed the performance appraisal and management system. So this is the tool where managers are sitting with their staff on a regular basis and engaging them in quite disciplined conversations about what they're doing, how they're doing it, what's working, what's not working. And I'm guessing you might have some of these tools already in your organization. We've done an organization-wide learning needs analysis. So they'd done this over the past. You know, some of it was okay, some of it was less so. But what we said is we need to do an actual learning needs analysis, and we need to find out where some of the gaps are. Okay? Because if we're saying we want to give people the right tools and the right skills, we need to know what those are anyway. We have already started to deliver what we are calling a learning and development proposition. So this is the offer. What's the offer? And some of the offer is around, as I said, knowledge management, the collaboration tools, but a lot of the offer is around persuading and influencing skills. So when you come together, how do you begin to talk to people in a way that's helpful, that's facilitative? We're giving people tools around making presentations. So we know that a lot of our people internally and externally have to make presentations on a regular basis. Are they doing that in the right way? We're giving people skills around management, managing themselves, personal effectiveness. So are you realizing your potential? What's your mindset, your behavior, your attitude? What's getting in the way of that? And then over the page, we've got a very, very specific management development program. So yes, we're developing the leaders, but what about everybody else? We've got a management skills series, and in the management skills series, we've got things like delegation, we've got elements around persuading and influencing. We've got elements around, you know, how do you bring together your team so you're actually doing team effectiveness? How do you actually work with your team on a regular basis? But we've also got very sort of what I call like foundational skills. So we're asking managers to be better at managing meetings. We're asking managers to be better at partnership working. So we're giving them the tools around that. With the training and development team, we've actually tasked them very deliberately. And I was asking some of your colleagues in ILM yesterday questions about your learning and development offer and how they work and what they do. I was being nosy, to be honest with you, to pick up good ideas. But in terms of the learning and development team, what we're doing with them is actually asking them to create what we call a new approach to learning and development. Some of what they've been doing is good stuff. It's good stuff, and they're good people wanting to do good work. That's why they're doing people development. But some of them have fallen into habits, and they've got themselves into a place where some of it's become a little bit stale. So if we've done a learning needs analysis, we know what we need to do. How do we do that more effectively? And when I say how, what we're suggesting is learning and development needs to be clearly evaluated, so we know what the value is, we know what the impact is, and we begin with the end in mind. So we make sure everything's effective, everything has clear objectives and an end point. And then following that, if we get some of those basics in place, what we're suggesting to this organisation is around being proactive in terms of talent development and succession planning. Okay? And by talent, what we mean is who are your really good people that you want to develop and support further to bring them on? And you know who those people are, but how are you going to bring them through your organisation? So I'm hoping this is helpful. I'm also conscious of time. I'm going to stop there for now, but I wondered if you could just take a few moments, please, just with the 2 or 3 people that you're sitting most closely with. Could you just take a couple of minutes to just reflect on what you've heard, what I've shared, and any questions you might have that you might want to ask at this point?
In the presentation.
Julia, I would like to know, because I just saw that you presented that this organization you need is to one of them is enabling environment. So I want to know that whether, because this organization need to be the leader should know all these things. The environment, I mean, they need to change the environment of an organization. So I would like to know what are the tips if they live in this environment. That means they need to change the environment, and what happens if that environment itself change the leader? Instead of the leader change the environment, then the environment itself change the leader. What are the tips to or any method to overcome that situation? Thank you.
Okay. Is there one more question, perhaps? So tell me, the person that answered the question, how often do you restructure currently? How regularly do you restructure now? It depends. Okay. So when you did the restructure just now, in November, how long ago was the previous restructure? Ten years ago. Okay, right. Okay. If it was 10 years, I'll begin and then you could chip in. Okay.
There might be a different situation over here, but some of the staff will have a very frequent reshuffling. But some of them will stay longer, as, for example, 10 years in the same position and the same job scope. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so...
Can I just say, just to make the point on, I don't think there's no right answer to restructuring. In fact, as you just said, for some people it seems to change every day, and for other people it doesn't seem to change at all. Now, on both accounts, you might think, if it's changing every day, why can't we get settled for at least a period of time? And for other people, if it never seems to change, are you honestly saying that over a 10-year period, how you spend your time hasn't had to be different, given everything else that's changing around us? So I think it works on both ends. I think it's more a question of a continuous dialogue about what are we trying to achieve, how well are we doing, how can we do it better? And that's to say we can improve, not because we're bad, because we're good, but we can only stay good by striving to be better. If we think we're good today and we can be good in a year's time and we do nothing else, then we become complacent, we become arrogant. We stop learning. And if we stop learning and we become arrogant, we stop performing. So it's a continuous dialogue, and it's not, I don't think it's a set, it doesn't have to be a big event every 10 years. It has to be a continual dialogue amongst people who care about what it is they're trying to do. That's the important point. The conversations, the dialogue about what it is we're trying to achieve. And I'll say more about that shortly when I talk about transformational leadership. Sorry, what was the second question?
Well, if I could just add to that, in terms of, when you talk about restructure, sometimes, we think we need to restructure, and we do restructure. And I have to be honest and say, in my experience with clients restructure for many different reasons. Okay? Sometimes clients restructure, particularly in local government in the UK. Local government, there will sometimes be restructured, and this is not what is espoused, this is not articulated, but they will restructure because they just want to move a few people on. They know that things aren't working so well, but rather than say things aren't working so well, they'll say, we'll have a restructure. We're going to refresh things a little bit. We're going to see how things go. And, you know, this might feel familiar to you. It might not be like this here at all. I don't know. But what I would say is, you know, I would say you need to, as Martin says, what's the purpose of the restructure? If the purpose is that you have a sense of what it is you need to do, your aspiration, and you want to be sure that you've got the right people in the right roles to support that, then that's a good reason. Okay? If you're doing it just because, oh, it's 5 years and we do it every 5 years, so let's do it again, that's not a reason to restructure. If it's because we know that there's a few issues here, things aren't working so well, we'll restructure and we'll move a few people around, that's not the reason to do it. That second piece, that's about having an honest conversation. That's about behaving with integrity and saying, there's some challenges here. We need to understand what those challenges are. We need to get our people to a place where things are more effective. But the question is not really about how often, but what's the reason, and is this the right frequency then to support that, is what I'd say. The second question was about enabling environment, Martin, and it was about, there was a sort of a two-part question. So the first piece was around leaders' knowledge, and the second piece was around tips. So if I can begin with leaders' knowledge, if I understood the question properly, there seemed to be a suggestion, and tell me if I'm wrong, the young lady that asked the question, but there was a suggestion that leaders need to know, they need to know clearly often what the enabling environment needs to be in order to be able to move in that direction. What I would suggest to you is they don't need to know in detail. You can't know anything in a great deal of detail. But what you can know is perhaps things aren't working as well as they could be. And if they're not working as well as they could be, then let's identify maybe 1, 2, 3 things that might help move us further forward. What's getting in the way, and how do we begin to tackle that? So you begin there, okay? Lots of my clients will say, oh, we just need to agree everything, and then we'll get started. You can't agree everything, but what you can agree are a few things. And hopefully those few things will begin to take you in the right direction in order for other things to fall into place. What I would also say is that your leaders, brilliant though they may be, okay, brilliant though they may be, and I was reading some research just last week that said that I think it was an incredible amount of people, something like 80% of people surveyed by Talent Corps in Malaysia said that they believe their leaders do the right thing for their organization most of the time. Now that's an incredibly positive response, okay? Incredibly positive, and you should be really, really, pleased with that response. But what I would say to you is that that level of response also puts an incredible amount of pressure on your leaders, because it's almost like they have to have all the answers, but they can't. Your leaders are there because they have a set of skills that are interpersonal as well as technical skills that have got them to somewhere where they need to be. But good leaders, great leaders, I suggest, build teams who help them get to the right answers. People who will know some of what they probably don't know, but can actually help them get to the right place. So with leadership, it's not about having all the right answers, but it's about recognizing what you bring, what others need to bring, so collectively you can have the solutions between you, is what I'd say. You also asked about tips. And I think if I understood it right, in terms of tips, if it's tips for leaders, I'd say exactly that. Build the right team to help you get to the solutions that you need. Trust that the people, good people around you, will help and support you moving in the right direction. But be really quite clear about what good looks like. Are you bringing somebody into the team because you know they can do what you need them to do? Okay, I gave you a few minutes to think about any other questions. So any other questions? Yes, please.
Fatima and Mr. Martin. My name is Hadi from Ilim. As you mentioned earlier, we spend most of our time working, around maybe 30 years, 40 years, something like that.
If you're lucky.
I have a very simple question here. that I keep I wanted to ask is, which is the best nature for work? Is it we go general on everything? Like in Jakim, actually we have like 20 or 30 departments. Is it better for us to go general on every department, or we go deep in one department but we are as good as we can in one department? Is it best if we focus on one department, or we can just be general on
Okay. Okay, can I?
something like that lah, because
Shall I go? Okay, right. So,
because there is a saying in Jakim, that we are heroes of nothing. We tend to know everything, but we're not specialized in something.
okay.
So I hope
Okay.
I can get some answer from you. Thank you.
Okay. So it kind of reminds me of a saying that we have in England, which is, but it's like having a T. Okay, so you have like the bar across the top, a capital T, and then you have the line going down. Okay, some people will have a narrow T, so it will be a very narrow band. Okay, and there are some roles where that narrow T is really important. If you're an economist, it takes a long time to get to be really good at what you do as an economist. Some of the people that I've worked with in this organization, when I met them, okay, they're analysts. Analysts will be analysts for a very long time, and every year they will write papers, they will present papers, they will be published, they will do more research, they will continue their PhD as well as do their work. You know, they have a narrow band, but very deep, deep, deep expertise, which comes over a long period of time. And then there are people who have a very wide T, you know, a broad level of experience. They're the generalists. And we can have generalist managers who will do, you know, a number of different things in a number of different places in the organization. What you need are people who will do either or both, okay? But what I would say to you is, where sometimes organizations, I can't say, you know, set up challenges for themselves. Let me put it like that. Where it becomes challenging is where we promote people who have a very narrow T into people management roles. Because what we do is we take technical experts, and because they're technically very good, we'll say, oh, let's promote them. Let's make them the manager over here. And then what we don't do is we don't give them the people management skills, we don't give them the development they need to be effective in that role. And what we find, in my experience, what you find is people in that kind of position, they don't have the core competencies to be successful. What they tend to do is they focus on their technical part and they abandon the people part slowly, 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 or they do it really half-heartedly. So I think you need some people who have a narrow T and do very deep expertise, but we have to recognize and value them for that skill and what they bring. It's not to talk about core competencies, it's about people management skills. You know, can they do that? There's something about interpersonal skills. How do I manage myself with my peers? How do I manage myself with the people above me? How do I manage myself with my team? So we need to build those core competencies. And then some of the core skills that I mentioned earlier around facilitation, negotiating, persuading and influencing, you know, how to manage yourself effectively in partnerships, working with others. They're the core competencies we need to actually equip people with. So they're not just sort of a jack of all trades, but actually they're generalists with very high level skills that they can take into different parts of the organisation. Did you want to add something to that?
Just a couple of words. There's something about what you need to be able to do, what you can do. There's something about what you need to know. So your knowledge and your skill are together. So what do I need to know about in order to be successful in this role, in the next role, in whatever role? And what do I need to be able to do in practice with that knowledge? I know a lot of knowledgeable people who are not very skillful. They can't get things done. They can just talk about getting things done. And I know a lot of very practical people who have very limited knowledge about some very specific things. And they can be very effective. But actually neither of those works well unless you consider a third element, which is who am I as a person? My being, my values, how I treat other people, you're all familiar, I guess, with emotional intelligence. How self-aware am I about the impact I have on other people? When I start to speak, are people listening? Or are they turning away? When I look at a room full of people in a meeting, I can tell you who's listening to who very quickly. Who's in control? Who's got power? Who's being ignored? Are you aware of the impact you have on other people? Because it doesn't matter how much you know and how skillful you are, if you don't have that relationship impact with other people, it is very difficult for you to make your mark, to make a difference. I always took the view that I wanted to be known as somebody who actually it was quite pleasant to work with. So being liked is quite a good thing, really. So am I somebody that other people want to work with? Am I somebody that can get things done because I want to get things done? So I have energy. But I also wanted to be known as somebody who was particularly good at a few things. So that if the organisation needed those few things, it came to me. So I wanted some sense of expertise. My expertise is around leadership, it's about facilitation, it's around consulting. I spent half of my life in public service because I believe in public service. But I spent 12 years with Deloitte in the private sector because I needed to learn and understand about work in the private sector. I then brought that knowledge and learning back into the public sector. So I get to go to your original question, sir, which is you need to think about your aspiration over a period. And then you need to build the skills, the experience, and your own self-understanding and awareness in order to help you to get there. Should we move on?
Yes, your slides are there.
Oh, thank you. Okay, pleasure to be here and to thank Allah for the opportunity to come and spend some time with you and to hope that Allah allows us to learn together through this next hour or so. It's a bit humbling actually to talk to a group of people certainly about some things which you know an awful lot more about than I do. This is one of my favourite hadith. The Prophet Muhammad noticed, peace be upon him, a Bedouin leaving his camel without tying it. He asked, "Why don't you tie down your camel?" The Bedouin answered, "I placed my trust in Allah." At that the Prophet said, "Tie your camel and place your trust in Allah." I've spent 40 odd years in work learning about leadership, being a leader, a director in public service, in national government, in Deloitte, being a consultant, being a trainer. For 40 plus years, I've spent most of my time, if you like, tying down my camel. I've learned to tie camels down I can tie a camel down incredibly well. 2 years ago, I placed my trust in Allah. 2 years ago. So I had 40 years of practice in my work, in my learning, in my vocation, leadership. And 2 years ago, I added trust in Allah to that 40 years. Alhamdulillah, that has made an amazing difference to me. Jazakallah. My Arabic is still that of a 2-year-old. But I am trying to learn, inshallah. I'm going to talk about leadership, and I want to talk about leadership and change and transformational change. But I do want to say a few personal words about that journey of mine, I suppose, which is that, I mean, for many years I've been academically interested in theology, in faith, in what brings people to faith, but I never had a faith. My mother was Catholic, but didn't practice. We never went to church. If you like, I would have said I was agnostic. I didn't believe, I did not believe. I just didn't know, and I didn't trust. And I spent many years, but I was always interested in learning about things. I met Fatima some years ago at work. We worked for the same organisation. I was a director of knowledge. She was the head of learning. And we worked together on different programs. We got to know each other quite well. And we talked about her faith as a Muslim. Then we sort of separated, didn't we? We went our different ways. And then we met again some years later. And 3 years ago, I had the great pleasure to work with a group of your colleagues from Jakim in London in 2015, as the alumni from 2015, on a leadership program. And I spent 4 weeks working very closely with 25 of you from Jakim. And it was just a really great 4 weeks, a really nice bunch of people, great to work with. But also what struck me was the serenity, the peacefulness, the happiness, the calmness of a group of people. And I have to say, and you will no doubt be familiar with this notion, that a lot of my understanding of Islam and of being Muslim comes from a Western perspective based on a media that in the last few years I've realized bears no relationship to my faith. Islam is a faith of peace. I wouldn't have known that had I not met colleagues from Jakim, spoken more with Fatima. And after that program, I started to go to Regent's Park Mosque. I started to go on Introduction to Islam courses, talk to the Imam, talk to the Director of Islamic Studies, and just learnt more and more. And one day, and I could not tell you now, hand on heart, why, because I didn't do it, I didn't think about it. I was there in the mosque one day, I went to the Director of Islamic Studies and I said, I'd like to say the Shahada. And I did. And the director took me to Zuhr prayers. I met the Imam after Zuhr and I said the Shahada again. And then the Imam filled out my certificate. Am I the only person in here who is officially a Muslim? I have a certificate to say so, which is very good. And so I became Muslim. And I told Fatima later that I'd become Muslim. And as you also know, we married a year ago at Regent's Park Mosque. So I do want to just say again, thank you to brothers and sisters from Jakim 2015, because you were an important part in that journey. And that brings me to what I'm supposed to be talking about. But what's also been interesting for me is to think about the work I've done and the thoughts I have, the beliefs I have about leadership in the context of being Muslim. Now, this is going to sound a really simple thing to say, but one thing that has struck me, if you only had one textbook on leadership available to you, it would be the Quran. What has really struck me is how much of what I have learned over years, I now find I'm able to relate to the Holy Quran as I read it more and more and I try to understand it more and more. Many of the lessons of what is great leadership are the lessons in our holy book. And I will make a few references to sections as I go through the next half an hour or so. The point Fatima was making earlier on about leadership and example. Oh, sorry. O you who are divinely committed, why do you say that which you do not practice yourself? The worst of you in the sight of Allah is he who says that which he does not practice. If we want to know about leadership, then we have to start with who we are as people and the impact we have on others, and we have to think about that impact in relation to our consistency and honesty in the way we treat other people. I'm going to come back to that very shortly. Let me just start here though. I don't know whether you're familiar with the phrase VUCA. Yes, you are familiar with VUCA. I don't need to spend much time on this then. This notion that things are volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. And as an organisation, you will have your own sense of the VUCA level in this organisation. And there will be periods of time when it feels more benign, it feels calmer, and there will be periods of time when it feels more volatile, things feel more uncertain, things feel more complex. But as I'll talk about a little bit later, in times of change, and if you've just had a restructuring, there will be a heightened uncertainty around the place simply as a result of that restructuring, even if your personal role wasn't affected. You could say in England, I would say, you don't need an at-risk letter to feel at risk. You don't need a letter telling you things are changing to feel a little uncertain, a little anxious. In benign times, when things are settled, if we don't get invited to a meeting, we treat that as a mistake that somebody may have made. In uncertain times, if we don't get invited, we start to think, why wasn't I invited? Are they trying to tell me something? Am I not going to be invited again in the future? All of our senses are heightened to the changes that are going on around us and how they will play out for us. And it's, I think, in leadership and in management, being sensitive to how people are feeling about the speed of change, about the uncertainty that's around, about the increasing complexity, helps us to stay connected in our conversations with our people. Because sometimes we have quite sensible, rational conversations as if everything else was still the same. And under the surface, something different is going on. The only other thing I would say on that slide is about this uncertainty. The outcomes, even from the familiar, are less predictable. I think what we're finding globally, internationally, is that the very things that people have been doing for years to get a certain result, they're still doing those things, but they're not getting the same result. Outcomes are becoming less and less predictable. We used to ask people to respond in a certain way, they would respond. Now we ask them to respond in a certain way, they all put yellow jackets on and start marching around the streets. We don't know necessarily what causes this, but it creates real problems for our organisations if we're not sensitive again to the fact that if we continue to do the things we've always done, and then wonder why it is we're not getting quite the same results. It's about the volatility and uncertainty that is in our societies, in our communities. And that's what we need to pay attention to as we think about our leadership. Just a few key messages for leaders. Can I just ask, while I'm on leadership, how many of you are in leadership positions? Hands up if you're in a leadership position. Is this modesty? Hands up if you're in a leadership position. Hands up if you're in a management position. People don't want to put their hands up. Let me just say, can I just ask everybody, please put your hand up. Everybody. Everybody, please put your hand up. That's the right answer to my first question. How many of you are in leadership positions? You all are. Again, in Islam, we're all shepherds of our flocks. Whether you're the shepherd of the whole flock or you're looking after one sheep, we're all shepherds of our flocks. And in an organisation, we want all of our people to be leaders, appropriately. Because what is leadership? Leadership is an action, it's not a position, it doesn't come with a title. I know lots of people with leadership titles who I wouldn't trust to lead me around this room. And I know lots of people who have no great title, but day in, day out, they make things happen that need to happen. They take action. They see somebody fall over, they go to pick them up. They see something happening in their mosque, they intervene, they join in. It's leadership at all levels that really makes organisations work well. Now, people in leadership positions have particular responsibilities, and they are looked at by everybody else in how they carry out those responsibilities. And that is not an easy place to be. But because we've got people called leader, doesn't absolve us from our responsibilities to do what we need to do at our level with our colleagues to make things happen. That's the only way Jakim can be successful over a long period of time. If we want change, it needs to come from within. The major difference I often think between success and I've failed at many, many things over many, many years. There aren't many things I haven't failed at. And I like to think it's because I tried them out. I tried to do them. I'm currently failing at learning Arabic. And I could come back, I could talk to you a long time about that, the difficulties of that. But the successful in life are the people who have failed but learned from it and changed their behaviour. Not kept repeating it and asked everybody else to change theirs. We need in leadership to create islands of certainty for people. When we're restructuring, when we're changing, when the world seems uncertain and volatile, then I think it's for us as leaders to keep reminding people of their core purpose, to keep reminding people of their success, to keep reminding people of, as I say, islands of certainty that they can keep hold of. And Fatima talked a lot about values. Our values are our strongest island of certainty. They ought to be. It's those values that bring us together. It's those values that allow us to say brother and sister. And that is what we need to keep bringing back to front of mind, even when everything else seems quite difficult. Because that's where our strength is. We need to tolerate mistakes. People, if they're changing, they're moving into new roles, are going to make mistakes. We need to be tolerant of that and to help people to learn through that. We have to accept that some things will take longer to do because people are not familiar with it. We need to change, anchor our change around purpose, and I've just talked about that. And people will always look for evidence that your behaviour matches your words. If, and I've seen this no end of times, certainly in the United Kingdom, organisations, every 6 months, every 12 months, the management team get together, they rewrite the values, the mission statement, the vision. It gets sent out to everybody on an email, everybody goes on a training course, it gets put up on the wall, and nothing changes. And it's like Groundhog Day for everybody. They think, well, that was interesting, let's wait till see what next year says. And they carry on as before. If the result of rewriting values, visions, missions, isn't a noticeable difference in the behaviour of senior people, why would anybody else change their behaviour? Most of us are sensible enough, if we're in an organisation, to look around at who's successful and copy them. Why wouldn't you? Isn't that what we want our children to do with us? Look at us and copy us, because this is behaviour worth copying. Well, leadership's the same. Most of us look at our senior people and we look at how they behave and we use that as the standard for our behaviour. And it's that collectively that then gets the organisation the results it gets. You get what you get in Jakim because you are who you are. If you want to get something slightly different, then you have to be something slightly different. And that starts in behaviour. It doesn't start in plans and it doesn't start in visions. It starts in day-to-day behaviour. Oh, lost the slide. I'll just let you read that top one. One of my favourite leadership thinkers, Winnie the Pooh. Some of you may be familiar with that from with your own children. Here is Edward Bear coming downstairs now, bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming downstairs. But sometimes he feels that there really is another way, if only he could stop bumping his head for a moment and think about it. One of the real challenges I think we have in leadership is to create the space around us to take the time to think of new ways. To stop our bumping our heads on the steps every day of the week. If for no other reason than to stop getting a headache. We have to create that space. And Abraham Lincoln said it in a similar way. If I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 4 hours sharpening my axe. Sometimes we have to stop being quite so busy and start being a little bit more thoughtful. Just a few quick definitions. Managing change is closing the gap between where you are and where you plan to be. So you know where you plan to be and you can manage that change. But in really difficult and uncertain times, you may plan to be somewhere, but you don't know whether that's where you're going to be in 2 years' time, 3 years' time. You don't know what circumstances will have changed. You can't manage that change because it's uncertain. Only Allah knows. So leading change is opening up space between how things are today and how they might be. And then getting people to move in that direction, to make those steps. And transformation involves fundamental change. Let me say a few words about that. If you want to continuously improve your organisation, that's fine. It doesn't challenge the culture. It's about optimising what you've currently got. It works from what's currently there. It's a minor disruption and it's relatively low risk. It will improve things. But if you're reaching a point in things that you do where improvement itself isn't good enough, if you look at the UK at the moment and austerity, people have been trying to have been taking out millions and millions and millions of pounds from public service. Very dishonestly, I think, because what they've been saying is, we can be more efficient. You can't. As long as you decide that you want to, for instance, look after elderly people in their old age, it will cost money. You can only be so efficient. There's a point beyond which efficiency won't do it. As long as you decide to have certain things in your community, you have to also decide to fund them. So austerity has reached a point years ago where it was fundamentally dishonest. People were being told you can have public services without taxation by being more efficient. Well, you can to a certain extent, but you reach a point where you can't do it. So the only thing you can do is to start to think about fundamentally different approaches to some of the problems we face in community. And that's where transformation starts to come in. But it's much higher risk. I'm going to skip that one, and I just want to go on to this. What happens to people when things are changing? Change occurs, and then something happens to each of us, all of us. None of us are immune from this over the period of that change. The first thing that tends to happen is that our confidence starts to dip. We had a great plan. We've been on all the training. It's now day one of the new system, and it's suddenly not working that well. Well, it never would, because we couldn't have planned it that well. It wouldn't have been possible. So our confidence starts to dip, and at the same time, our anxiety increases. And we get confused about things. And the things that we've been familiar with for many years are no longer there. If we change a structure, and some people leave, some people retire, new people come in, we're changing relationships that some of us have been building for many years. We're now working with people we're not familiar with. We don't know these people so well. We've got to start again to build relationship. That creates anxiety, it creates some confusion. And our sense of competence also starts to decrease. What we were always very good at doesn't appear to be what we need to be good at next. So we've got to learn some new things. And as adults, we don't like learning new things necessarily. It makes us uncomfortable. Has anybody here ever tried to learn to play tennis, for instance? Yeah? I played tennis for years. I could get the ball over the court. Then I had some coaching lessons. The first thing the coach did was tell me how hopeless I was. He made me very aware of how incompetent I was. And then he taught me some new things, which meant that for a long period I couldn't get the ball over the net, but I did look good. I looked great, I just couldn't hit the ball anywhere. And over a period I practiced and practiced and practiced until I could start to do it well again. But that period of uncertainty is what it feels like for us in our organisations at times. And it's not comfortable. And we reach a point here in the middle where it feels its worst. The question then is, what are we as leaders doing to help our people through that period in order to get to somewhere better? And that's where leadership comes into play. Not telling people what to do and how to do it, but listening to people about how they're feeling about what's going on. Supporting people as they work together to try to work through to a better way of being. And talking all the time about purpose. Why are we doing this? We're not doing this to make us feel bad. We're doing it because the work we do in Jakim is so important, so valuable, that we need to ensure that we are carrying that work forward in the best way possible over the longest period. That's why, and that's what we need to talk to each other about. Skip that. I know some of you this afternoon, we've got another session this afternoon. I don't know who in this room now is going to be with us this afternoon. But I'm going to talk a bit more in detail about, I'm going to drill down to some of these things about the qualities of transformation leaders this afternoon with that group of people. We've already touched on a number of these points. But I want to finish here and then open it up for any questions. This is, those in the 2015 Jakim group will be familiar with this, I hope. It's a test of their memory. General William Slim was a British general in the Second World War who, after the Japanese had beaten the British quite badly in Burma, Myanmar, the British had been pushed out of Burma into India, and General Slim was sent in to try and turn things around. In 1954, he wrote a book called Defeat into Victory, which is his story of that campaign. And it is one of the best leadership books I've ever read. In it, he talked about leadership, and he talked about what was important in leadership, and he talked about those three things. He talked about the material. So it's important that our people have the right materials to do the job, the best materials we can get them. When Slim went into that army, they had very little by way of equipment, armaments. 70–80% of the soldiers had malaria. Interestingly, he didn't blame the soldiers for that. He blamed their officers for not making sure they took the anti-malaria tablets. He said that was a function of your leaders not leading. But he made sure that he got them the best equipment he could get them, that he got them supplies, that they were as well treated as they could be. He talked about the importance of the intellectual knowledge. We talked about that a bit earlier on. Having officers, managers, knowing what they were doing, able to organise, able to control, able to do logistics, the best management that they could have. And that is important in your organisation. But Slim said the most important in this is the spiritual. Only spiritual foundations can withstand great strain. And he said that in order for an army, in his case, for an organisation in your case, to be successful, there must be a great and noble object. Now, as far as I know, you're not involved in the distribution of parcels, or the delivery of fast foods, or the provision of hotel services, all of which in themselves can be noble objects. Nothing wrong with any of those things. And if I could motivate somebody to be the best deliverer of fast food in the world, which I could, because that happens, how much simpler must it be for you to motivate yourselves and each other about the purpose of Jakim? I can't think of a more noble object than your purpose. I don't know how often you talk about your purpose day to day, as distinct from talk about the work that you do. But for Slim, the spiritual foundation that he talked about is the degree, the amount of time we spend focused on our purpose as a great and noble object. That its achievement must be vital, that the method of achievement must be active and aggressive, not passive. And this is a quote from Slim: "The man must feel that what he is and what he does matters directly towards the attainment of the object, of that object." Every one of you in this room has a direct connection to the success of Jakim and its purpose. And it doesn't matter who you are and where you are and what you do in the organisation, you have a relationship, a connection to your purpose of Jakim. People need to be convinced that the object can be attained, that it's not out of reach. We can tie our camel and we can trust in Allah. And we put those two things together, we can be convinced. We can be convinced that what we're trying to do can be achieved, will be attained, and we will be successful. And all this other stuff that's going on is stuff that we work through, we live with, we manage. but we lead each other and we lead ourselves to achieving that purpose. Again, from Slim at the bottom, and we all talk the same stuff with the same object. In terms of consistency in leadership, having leaders all saying the same few things all the time about purpose, why our achievement is vital, why we will be successful. Having those conversations with people who otherwise might be feeling anxious, but just to remind them about the importance of their purpose and the importance of the part they're playing in it. That, I think, is great leadership. Jazakallah for listening to me, and I will stop there and open it up to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin and Mrs. Fatima, for your very valuable presentations. And I will open again the floor for any questions and comments regarding the presentation, especially with regards to the topics. And you also may ask a little bit out of topics if it's still related.
Close to your employees, staff. So, do we need some sort of a skill like intelligent, emotional intelligence in our organizations? That's
Understanding your own fears and uncertainties. We stand there, you know, we look at our leadership and they stand there and you know, like they don't get worried, they know all the answers. No, they don't. None of us do. So having an understanding of yourself is the place to start. But also being able to read other people and the emotional, the effect emotion has on them in order to be able to make the connections and have the conversations. We have to put our egos to one side. You see, I personally, if you look at a lot of leadership models, they look at it as a sort of a master and a servant. So we've got titles, we walk into rooms, people sit in certain positions, we adopt the position of master and servant. When local government meets federal government, who's the master, who's the servant? Well, they have an argument about that, I know. But federal often thinks of local differently. Local thinks of federal. People are positioning themselves. Think of it a different way though. Servant, servant. We're all servants. We're all servants, and the master is our purpose. The master for us is our faith, first and foremost. But the master is our purpose. None of us are masters of others. We just have different roles to play in achieving that purpose. So if you as a senior manager, whatever, leader, approach your people, your staff, on the basis that you're their servant as much as they're your staff, then that might affect how you treat them and how they treat you.
how much it will take for the curve to go up?
Oh, that's actually a very good question. The one thing to say on this is that it affects everybody. Everybody. Nobody's immune from this. These feelings. For some, they're more extreme than others. If you think about a restructuring, most restructuring start at the top, and then they work through. So for the first period of time in a restructuring, the most senior people are feeling like that. I did a restructuring of 2 councils in England where they were bringing the 2 councils together to have one management team. The first day I started working there were 16 directors in a room. They all knew that 6 months later, only 7 of them would be there. But at the same time, they still had a responsibility to lead and manage in that 6 months. That's not easy. They were competing with each other. and still trying to collaborate with each other. That's not easy. So in a restructuring, it starts there. And the first period, it's senior people who are feeling that. Now, once they're confirmed in role, or not, they know where they stand. They can move through it. The interesting thing then is, do they then remember how it felt when the next people come through the same process? Or do they pretend as if, don't worry about it, it'll be fine, you don't need to worry, as if it never happened to them? So the answer to your question is, it's different for different people. Some people, I have to say honestly, like being in the middle there, because they don't have to take any responsibility for doing anything. They can simply say, oh, woe is me, the organisation's terrible, look how it's treating me, oh, it's all bad. And they can moan and moan and moan, and they like it, because they can't be responsible for doing anything, it's not their fault. Luckily, most people are not like that, they want to get through it. So it's different for everybody. The point is, though, for leadership, how are we working to help people through this as quickly as possible? Recognizing that it's happening. That's a reality of emotional reality. We recognize it's happening, we work to help people work through it. And then we can work people through it quite quickly. Does that answer your question?
You don't have any specific time?
Oh, for some people it's a long time, for some people it's a short time. What I am saying though is everybody, nobody is immune from that, those feelings. And if you've got a point, you see, if you start a restructuring at the top, even before you've talked about the third tier, the fourth tier, the fifth tier, they know it's coming. They start to feel that in anticipation of any change. Nothing's happened and they still feel like that. And that's the reality. And if the restructuring takes a year, 18 months, 2 years, you've got waves of people going through this all the time. So as leaders and as brothers and sisters, what are we doing to help each other and ourselves work well in spite of that set of circumstances? That's the key. Any more questions?
Sir, maybe I have,
Please.
Could you suggest the best shape of the organization that JAKIM should have, whether it be diamond shape, triangular shape, or whatever shape that you think suitable for the organization?
No would be the short answer. I would love to be able to answer the question, but it would require a much more, a fuller. I don't have the understanding of JAKIM to be able to comment, really. I would need a much fuller conversation with brothers and sisters here about who you are and your purpose. What I would say is, sometimes we can spend a lot of time on things like structures and shapes, but actually, if your people have the right spirit, the right attitude, the right values, the right beliefs, they'll make any shape work. You can make any shape work. And shapes change and fashions change and we talk about, and that's okay, there's good stuff in management. But fundamentally, how well JAKIM works is a function of you, people. And you can make any shape work and trust in Allah.
Thank you, sir. So, any more questions from the floor?
Thank you very much for Mrs. Fatima and Mr. Martin for interesting speech for leadership. In organization development diagnostic, I am talking about relationship between political idea and values in organization. sometimes those of team is not matched. Sometimes they have complete each other. On the other hand, policies plus values not match each other. How to solve this problem? Thank you very much.
Okay. Now going to need another half day, so I hope you're ready. This could take a while. You may want to comment. Do you want to start?
No, I can add to it.
Just to say that for both of us actually have spent quite a lot of time working in local government and national government. And so we've spent a lot of time working with both politicians, political leaders, and with officers, officials, managerial leaders. And at the moment, back in England, I'm coaching the leader of one council, the deputy leader of another council, and I'm also coaching the chief executive of another council. So it's working with both politicians and with officials. In local government, and it seems to me in government, and you will comment in terms of your country, Malaysia, and state governments and federal governments. But clearly there is a political agenda. Politicians are elected on a platform. We may or may not like as officials what it is they're elected on. But actually that's irrelevant. Part of what we sign up to be as public officials is neutral on the politics of something and less than neutral on the practice of trying to put that politics into practice. We're charged with advising ministers, with advising politicians, giving them our best advice. What they do with it then becomes their choice. And I think that's where there is no right answer to that relationship. You're the politician, I'm the official. If I'm the chief executive, the director, you're the minister, you have a point of view. If you trust me, you will listen to my point of view. If I trust you, well, that doesn't come into it. You're the minister. If you trust me, you'll listen to my point of view. I have no choice. I have to listen to your point of view. I may seek to influence it, and why wouldn't I? If I see you stepping off the road in front of a bus, am I going to say, well, that's a political choice, smack? No. I'm going to pull you back. So I would hope to stop you making mistakes if I see something, and I hope you would respect me when I do that. But ultimately, you are the minister, you will make the decision. If you make that decision, I will support it. One of the things that strikes me forgive me my sort of Muslim newness, if you like. So I notice things that maybe you were born with, you grew with. It's interesting. I was in the mosque. We were praying. The imam was praying, and then halfway through the prayer, somebody said something. And the imam stopped, and then the imam did something else, and this was all in Arabic. I didn't know, I didn't understand. So afterwards I came out and I said to a brother, I said, excuse me brother, I said, what happened? I don't know what happened. He said, the imam made a mistake. So somebody in the congregation told the imam he'd made a mistake. And then I don't know whether the imam just carried on. And what I learned from that in Islam is that it's back to that servant-servant thing. In our faith, we are actually responsible for pointing out things that are wrong. It's somebody in the congregation you are supposed, if the imam makes a mistake, somebody's got to tell him. And that's right. The imam doesn't say, no, I'm the imam, you can't, I know what I'm doing. The imam responds to that. If the imam then carries on, we follow. We don't have an argument. We do what we're supposed to do, the imam does what he's supposed to do, and we follow. That's one of the beauties, I think, of there is no compulsion in religion. There is no, We are responsible for our choices. And in that relationship with the politician, it's quite clear who's responsible for what. And the trust between us allows us to make things work well. And we build that relationship. If we rely on the contract, we've got a problem. We have to rely on the relationship. Yes. Yes. I hope that, at least in part, answers your question. We
Any comments? Any further comments? Anything you would like us to take away in terms of learning?
no.
Should we stop there?
I think we shall stop there then. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
very
much.
much for your time.
Now a bit of applause to them. We will apply those things that been shared to us in our daily life, especially that I just get from the presentation is the engagement with people of employees is very important and move the organization forward. And I like the term we, me, we, and us. So that simplify the presentation.